Tonight on Quantum, how sunlight damages your eyes as well as your skin. And did kangaroos ever eat meat? A 15-year-old scientist tries to find out. Hello and welcome to Quantum. Also tonight from the BBC, a disturbing report about Romania, which shows what happens when politicians put production ahead of the environment. The result? A man-made disaster, President Ceausescu's lethal legacy. But first, the story of a drug which confronts scientists and politicians with a moral and ethical dilemma.
Paris is the city of romance. Here in spring, a young woman's heart may turn to love. But love too has its seasons. The heat of summer can be followed by the chill of autumn. The result may be an unwanted pregnancy.
Here in France, that's not a problem. Abortion has been legal here since 1955. But 10 years ago, some French scientists made an astounding and controversial discovery, one that has really put the cat amongst the pigeons. What they'd created was a chemical molecule which offered to the women of the world what many had been seeking, an abortion pill. However, despite successful clinical trials in several countries in the world, RU486, the abortion pill, is available only here in France.
Not surprisingly, the abortion pill has been the subject of heated debate, bitterly fought against by advocates of the right to life movement and angrily demanded by women who argue for their right to choose. One of France's strongest supporters of the pill is in fact a man, Professor Étienne-Émile Beaulieu, of the French Institute for Medical Research and author of The Pill Generation.
I think that when there is a drug which can help women in difficult situations, it's their right to have it. But in developing countries, abortion is a major health problem. Not only when it is illegal, which is still in several countries, let's say Brazil, between 5 and 10 millions of illegal abortions per year, with the number of women who die, it's about 200,000 a year overall for the world. Of women who become sick and gravely sick with infection, perforation, sterility. And so this is millions of women, really. Plus the psychological trauma, all these things. I mean, women, after all, they make children. We should respect them for that.
At the center of the abortion pill fracas has been the French pharmaceutical company Roussel-Uclaf, whose scientists discovered almost by chance a new way to halt pregnancy. The key to it all was the hormone called progesterone.
Many people around the world working in reproductive biology were looking for an anti-progesterone. That means a molecule which would counteract the action of progesterone, and nobody would find. There was no lead for it.
Progesterone is essential for pregnancy. It causes the endometrium, the lining of the uterus, to thicken and prepare itself to nourish the egg. It also inhibits muscular contraction in the uterus wall and strengthens the cervix. Clearly, a drug which blocked the actions of progesterone would have enormous potential for contraception or abortion. Back in 1980, in the company's chemical laboratories, they were developing a range of synthesized steroids, artificially created versions of reproductive hormones such as progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. Normally, these steroid hormones create chemical signals in the body, which regulate a number of important physiological processes. The way they work is like a key and lock system. The hormone is the key, which fits into a special protein receptor, the lock. Once the two are fitted together, the hormone unlocks a chain of commands which activates specific functions in the body. They were playing around with the molecular structure of the synthetic progesterone when it all fell into place.
what we did here in the lab is to modify this synthetic version and add this big chemical group at this position of this steroid. And then you will see that this new compound, which is RU486, looks very different from progesterone. That's evident here. What was surprising is that this molecule would bind to the same receptor as progesterone, as well and even much better than progesterone does.
Having established that the synthetic molecule would bind to progesterone receptors, the question was whether it would behave like progesterone and unlock the receptor. Much to their surprise and delight, however, RU486 had the reverse effect. It locked up the receptor, blocking the action of progesterone.
We knew immediately that this was a medical alternative to a surgical process, and this then could facilitate, but in terms of health facilitation, in terms of better psychological and physical comfort for the women in a difficult circumstance.
At Beaulieu's urging, the company pressed ahead with the research. RU486 was tested on laboratory rats by the pharmacology section, with success. The first clinical trials with women were conducted in 1982 with promising results. Large-scale trials followed in 1984 and 5. These confirmed that RU486 worked successfully in 80% of cases to induce an abortion. Further studies in Sweden showed that RU486 worked most successfully when followed by an injection with prostaglandin, a chemical which induces contraction of the uterus. Finally, in 1989, Roussel-Clough released RU486 as a drug onto the market, only to be greeted by a storm of protest. As a consequence of the pressure applied internationally, Roussel-Clough withdrew the product after just a matter of weeks. It was a decision that attracted attention on high.
At that point, the French government, with a 36% stake in the company, stepped in. The health minister announced that the drug was the moral property of women, not just the company, and he threatened to withdraw their patent under French law. Doubtless reluctant to lose the rights to the abortion pill, however controversial, Roussel-Clough resumed production.
RU486 is now available in France, but only through strictly controlled government clinics, like the one at Broussais Hospital in Paris. Although some 60,000 women have now opted for the pill in preference to surgery, it's not as simple a procedure as you might think. First, the patient is interviewed to assess her suitability for treatment, both physically and psychologically. For a start, she must be no more than 49 days from the start of her last period, and by law, she is obliged to see a social worker. The treatment involves taking 3 pills, which the patient must administer to herself under medical supervision at the clinic. 2 days later, she receives an injection of prostaglandin, and the abortion usually takes place within 4 hours.
They asked me if I were aware of what I was doing, and I had to read some instructions about what it was, about the consequences, about the process. So before I begin, I knew all the procedure I would follow. And I chose it, of course, and that's important, I think. I chose that because I was not ready to have a baby at the time. I was responsible of that, yes, of course.
The advantage of the abortion pill is that there is no surgery. Pain and bleeding are consistent with normal periods, and the woman is in control of what's happening. And according to a study of over 10,000 women who've had an abortion this way, it's 95.3% successful.
The future of the man is in women. And it's an additional reason for giving them, at the same time, dignity and medical means to have a better health.
For the time being, though, French women remain the only ones with access to the abortion pill. The manufacturers are saying they will only sell the drug to countries prepared to meet strict legal and medical requirements. Meanwhile, women around the world wait for their right to choose.
We all know that too much sun without some kind of protection can cause skin cancer. It's ultraviolet B light that does the damage. But now eye specialists believe that UVB is just as dangerous for your eyes as it is for your skin. Just how much UVB will do damage? Well, this special contact lens has been created here in Brisbane to find out.
Keep your eye very still, lids wide open.
The contact lens is made of a photosensitive plastic called CR39, similar to the material in sunglasses. But this lens doesn't protect your eyes from ultraviolet B light. It absorbs and registers how much light the eyes receive.
Yes, well, that seems to be fitting.
Dr. Lawrence Hurst of Brisbane's Princess Alexandra Hospital is using the lenses to find out both how much UVB light is dangerous and which lifestyles and occupations expose people to the most UVB.
Now, I'd like you to keep this on all the time, all your waking hours for the next 5 days, and it'll be recording the ultraviolet B light that you're exposed to.
Ultraviolet B light is outside the visible light spectrum. We can't see it, but we can see its effects. Conditions like pterygium, a growth on the cornea, and cataracts, clouding of the eye's lens. Both are on the increase worldwide thanks to our depleted ozone layer. For the next 5 days, these lenses will record all the UVB light that reaches my eyes. A lot of it I'm not even going to be aware of. For instance, with a broad-brimmed hat and a pair of sunglasses on, I assume I'm protected. But in fact, there's a lot of reflected light that's getting in around the sides and underneath these glasses. We'll find out if that's enough light to do damage. Clinical trials will use the UV lens to record how much light reaches people's eyes when they do or don't wear sunglasses or hats, whether people with heavy brows or even big noses have different levels of exposure, and whether warnings should be given to people in jobs where the risk of eye damage is high. 5 days later, the lenses are ready to give their verdict.
Hey, Megan, that's fine.
Finding out how much light the lenses have recorded is a bit like developing a film. A solution of potassium hydroxide etches the contact lenses. The more opaque areas appear on the lens, the more exposure to UVB light the wearer has had. Laser measuring reads that exposure. For me, the result is 2 MED. That's about twice the amount of UVB it takes to burn fair skin on a Brisbane summer's day. By itself, that exposure is nothing to worry about.
Not at the moment. I wouldn't say from that 5 days exposure, but whether that matters over a lifetime is a different matter. It may turn out that no ultraviolet B exposure is good ultraviolet B exposure.
Until the experts know what level of exposure is safe, the best policy is full protection. Broad-brimmed hats, plus full wrap-around sunglasses. Now for some serious research.
The fossils at Riversleigh were everywhere. People just had no time to look at them or anything. It was just bag them, let's take them back and we'll look at them in the laboratory. It was sort of on the brink of discoveries of all sorts of kinds. It was really amazing.
Riversleigh in far north Queensland is perhaps the richest fossil site in the world. And it's the perfect place to capture the imagination of a budding young scientist. Every season, a team of volunteers and researchers from the University of New South Wales unearths new creatures from Australia's prehistoric past. Giant snakes and birds, primitive possums, even what some believe could be a carnivorous kangaroo.
Well, when I went up to Riverslea with my dad, around mealtime everybody was talking about the things they'd done in the day, and especially about the carnivorous kangaroo. There was a lot of discussion about that. And since I had a school project to do, it just fit in and went from there.
15-year-old Kirsten was intrigued by the idea that a kangaroo could be carnivorous. She wondered whether she could devise a chemical test that would reveal what this extinct animal had eaten 20 million years ago. The traditional way out of this problem is to look at teeth. By comparing the teeth of your prehistoric beast with those of something similar that's still around, you can usually make a pretty good guess at what its diet might have been. But what if your fossil has teeth unlike anything living? Then you've got a mystery. This could have been a carnivore or maybe a herbivore. The teeth of this so-called carnivorous kangaroo are unique. There's a large dagger-like incisor in front of an extra tooth bearing strange serrated edges. Definitely not your average roo. So in this case, teeth alone can't provide an answer. Her theory is based on the old principle of you are what you eat. In other words, some of the things that you consume remain in your body. One of these is strontium, quite a rare element, but whenever it's eaten, it ends up in the bones in place of calcium. Herbivores, plant eaters, absorb into their bones the strontium that plants have accumulated. Carnivores, in turn, should absorb the strontium that the herbivores consumed. So you'd expect that creatures higher up in the food chain, like these Tasmanian devils, would have more strontium in their bones than, say, a koala. It makes sense, but is it true? If it is, then measuring the strontium levels in the fossil should tell Kirsten whether the Riverslea kangaroo was a meat-eater or not.
Have a look at this thing.
Kirsten's father, Professor Mike Archer, thought that her alternative idea was definitely worth exploring and would give her valuable scientific experience even if it didn't work out. She began by smashing up part of the kangaroo fossil. For comparison, she also tested a fossil python and a more typical fossil kangaroo. These gave her a known carnivore and a herbivore for reference. After a few days, the samples, dissolved in acid, were analysed. To Kirsten's delight, the Riverslea kangaroo did have a higher level of strontium, strongly suggesting that it was in fact a meat-eater. However, the python, which was obviously not a herbivore, registered a low level. Similarly, she compared the fossil of an extinct marsupial lion with a fossil Tasmanian devil and a kangaroo. True to Kirsten's predictions, the lion had more strontium than the kangaroo, but the devil's level was unexpectedly low. Something wasn't quite adding up. So to double-check that the idea itself was valid, Kirsten ran a third test. This time she didn't use fossils, but the fresh bones of known herbivores and carnivores, ranging from a koala to a native cat. The results were completely unexpected. The herbivores consistently registered higher strontium levels than the carnivores.
Not exactly what I expected. I expected the carnivores to be much higher than the herbivores, which didn't happen. So there's something slightly wrong here with the method.
Well, the method or something mysterious is going on. Some other factor is involved here that we didn't anticipate.
Well, it could be what they're eating. They might not actually be eating the bones. And if they're not eating the bones, they won't be taking in the strontium that's in the bones.
Yeah, that's possible.
Kirsten admits that in its present form, the test can't clarify the status of the carnivorous kangaroo. For the time being, All there is to go on are those perplexing teeth. But Kirsten's not about to give up.
Yeah, it's something that I want to see through. This is the second year I've been working on this thing. And after 2 years, you don't want to give up. Yeah, I want to see this finished. I like the idea of an entire career doing this. It's sort of been an introduction into that field. It's really interesting.
During the 70s, the industrialization of Romania was Nicolae Ceausescu's obsession. A rapid, unfettered industrial program took place. But it had to be paid for in foreign loans. Loans that by the end of the decade had reached more than $10 billion. In the 80s, Ceausescu's new obsession was to pay that money back. He drastically rescheduled the country's economic program. Imports were reduced to virtually nothing, while the country's farms and factories were set the highest possible production targets. Now was to be a time of maximum economic exploitation for maximum exports. Cost to be borne by the people and by the environment.
Most of the rivers are polluted in such way that you can't find the fish. Smoke is very dangerous in some places, you know. Chemical plants are releasing dangerous smoke. We need specialists who can measure the level of pollution. I don't even know if there are some, because it was better till now to not know the level of pollution and to not make a worry of the population on this. And that's why I suppose these specialists weren't formed. Everything is kept secret. All the health situation of the public, it is a secret, a state secret.
This factory near the town of Dej in Transylvania employs 5,000 making synthetic fibres and paper. Like many other Romanian factories, it was poorly designed and poorly built, and was denied access to foreign technology on pollution controls. In the drive for maximum production, programs for maintenance and renovation were shelved or abandoned.
Depinde de secțiile unde se lucrează, dar în general există o
The pollution depends on where people have been working, but in general there's a sort of interaction between the substances concerned. We've had to deal with a premature aging effect on the human body which the pollution brings about.
One of the most dangerous toxins produced at the factory is carbon disulfide, which affects the central nervous system and is linked with heart disease. In the West, the limit for carbon disulfide in a factory is 30 milligrams per cubic metre of air. In Romania, the limit is 50 milligrams. But in this factory, random checks found even that limit was regularly exceeded. The highest level recorded was 500 milligrams, enough to kill. Last year, someone did die. One night, the ventilators failed, allowing vast amounts of CS2 to stay in the air. 8 people began vomiting and having spasms. 1 woman died. 4 of the medical team that went to help also became ill.
All of us doctors have been very concerned as we've been very close personally to these men. And of course everyone, including doctors, are affected by the poison and the gases which surround us.
Into this river just a mile away are dumped all the factory's unwanted byproducts. A noxious mixture of chemicals they pour in all day, every day. The pollution oozes its way downriver for 7 kilometres. When the effluent was first allowed in the water, all the fish died. It's not known if there's life now.
Simțim în primul rând o At the outset, we were opposed to the building of this factory here. We have documented evidence of the impossibility of situating the factory here because of the pollution problem, and were against the process being used. We even told the ministry of this evidence.
The factory dumps one chemical, lignosulfonate, into the river without any treatment at all, even though it's known to absorb the oxygen. 40 or more tonnes every single day of a chemical that the factory knows does terrible harm, but has no idea how to treat. Guidelines limiting the amount of pollution were never taken seriously in Romania. If factories followed them, they wouldn't achieve their production targets. And for that, there'd be penalties. That kind of pressure has now been lifted, but the country is still encumbered with factories that by their very design continue to pollute.
In view of the present state of affairs, closing the factory would be the most recommendable solution, but it's linked with other factories making artificial fibres, and there are others again dependent upon them. So to close this factory would create a lot of unemployment.
That's Romania's predicament. It cannot afford to close the factories for fear of losing jobs by the thousand. But it can't afford to go on polluting its country either. Romania's tragedy is an object lesson in what happens if nature is treated as if it didn't matter, if industry is allowed to escape costs by simply dumping them on the environment. It was the Ceausescu method of pollution control. If in doubt or difficulty, dump it. Unfortunately, Romanians can expect little relief in the near future. To put the environment back to rights requires billions of dollars. But because of Romania's record on human rights, the international community is reluctant to help out. Next week on Quantum, a documentary which seeks to unlock the secrets of the rainforest.
This is a poached tree, in its own way as sad as a poached elephant or rhino. Plants that grow only in the roof of the forest are brought down to ground level. These treetop orchids, which contain who knows what chemicals, can't flourish down here.
On next week's Quantum, Rainforest Remedies. Until then, good night.
This week in the Science Show on Radio National, the story of Tilt-Down Man, possibly the biggest scientific forgery in history, this Saturday afternoon at 12:40 on Radio National. Coming up, our ABC special, How Wonderful.